Hi, everyone. I'm Dan Jones. Welcome to Interchange. Thank you so very much for joining us. Lots to talk about again today. This idea about extending the sales tax that supports Miller Park so it could support a new arena for the Milwaukee Bucks is just not going to go away. We'll also talk about voter ID finally becoming reality here in Wisconsin and some Democrats refusing to even vote for it. We'll talk about Arnold Schwarzenegger's secret illegitimate kid finally coming to light, and we'll wonder out loud what the future holds for all the college kids who are graduating this month. All right, first let me introduce everyone. We have newspaper columnist this week, every week, Joel McNally. Longtime broadcaster, political analyst, and oftentimes a fill-in host over on WISN Radio, Kevin Fischer. Denise Callaway, she is the coordinator of business and community partnerships for the Milwaukee Public School System. And Gerard Randall, consultant and local job creation expert. Rick Horowitz will be along with commentary at the end of the show. All right, the first thing we have to talk about is this 0.1% sales tax that everyone in southeastern Wisconsin pays to support the building and maintenance of Miller Park. It is supposed to expire in just a few years, but now, once again, there's loud talk about possibly extending it and shifting it over to cover construction costs of a new arena for the Milwaukee Bucks. Some people say, oh, this is dead on arrival, Kevin, but I don't think it's going away.
It is dead on arrival. Tim Sheehy, who I know and like and admire and respect and have for many years, I don't know where he's coming from on this. This is some sort of crazy trial balloon. It's DOA. And I love the Bucks. I supported the sales tax for the Brewers. But this is why people who hate tax increases always bring up the fact that whenever you hear the argument that it's a temporary increase, it will be sunsetted, it will go away, that never seems to be the case. It seems to have more lives than a room full of cats. What will hurt this proposal big time is that there's no political will in the state legislature that lost a member, our good friend and colleague and former panelist George Petak, to do this all over again. And let's remember that this sales tax was designed, earmarked specifically for the Brewers and Miller Park. It was not for, when the sunset comes, let's just extend it now to the Milwaukee Bucks who are in trouble.
But you know what, Denise, if this plays out like the baseball thing played out, where they say, you know, Milwaukee, you're going to lose the Bucks unless you build this new arena for them, I think everybody will start thinking a different way.
Well, I think that the reason Tim Sheehy is bringing this up is because we have a problem and that we've got to figure out a way to improve the facility that the Bucks play in, or we do run the risk of losing the Bucks. I think it's even more of a risk now that Senator Cole is retiring. He's leaving the Senate. What are his ties going to be to the greater Milwaukee area, and how long will he be dedicated to keeping the Bucks here if he can't bring in the kind of revenue that he needs to bring in? You know, we've got to figure out a way in which to do it. And if it's not going to be continuing that sales tax, what is it going to be? Because otherwise we're going to find ourselves, as you suggested, in a very reactionary mode where the Bucks are perhaps going to leave town and we don't know what we're going to do to be able to find a way to come up with a revenue to keep them here.
There are only so many Jane Pettits in the world.
Right, that's true.
And it's going to have to come from private money or a conglomeration of private sources. I think it's going to have to be a mix
of both public and private sources. And we've got to be able to start talking about what that's going to be. So, you know, the fact that Tim put out this idea and it's maybe dead on arrival, the real problem with that is, what is the next idea then? What are we going to do? We need to put ourselves in a situation where we start talking about some creative solutions to come up with a way in which to bring some money in so that we can have a new facility for them, or we're going to find ourselves panicking at the last minute to try to figure out what we need to do. And I think one thing we'll all agree on is when we wait for something like that to happen, we don't make the best decisions possible, and we're not in the driver's seat.
And you know, this town is crazy nuts about sports, so once you do raise the possibility that without a new facility in Milwaukee, you could lose this team and fall out of the headlines, people start thinking differently.
I would rather have the conversation now than later, because later does mean you make bad decisions, as Denise pointed out, and you drive the cost. But as long as right now there's no will in the legislature or among the political leadership to do it, because they do remember what happened to George Petak, and they remember that there are others, especially in this budget situation, that would say, if you're going to use that tax for something else, here's our list of priorities. where we would rather use a tax revenue for something else that has a greater priority for us. Here's the thing that's kind of interesting about it, though. The Brewers haven't maintained their schedule with regards to the revenue for that tax either. And so there's going to be an extension of their use of that tax. People take a look at the Bradley Center and they don't see a facility that looks like it's falling down, that it's aged. Yeah. So it looks great. It seems to be a place that's welcoming to those people who use those seats. It's just going to be a very, very difficult case to make that you ought to tear it down. Plus, somebody takes a look and they say, $400 million private gift over the last 20 years, and now you want to tear that down. Who are you going to find that will put up legacy money for another facility if it disappears like that?
Does Milwaukee need this team?
I like the team. I go to games, and as Kevin knows, I go to Miller Park all the time, but I actually opposed the tax for Miller Park. And I oppose a tax for the Bucks as well. It is absurd. This shows Tim Sheehy really doesn't know what his job is. This is a man who did not lift a finger when the governor they elected, the MMAC elected, turned down $810 million in economic development through high-speed rail that would have created jobs all over the state. And now, instead of accepting $810 million, he wants the taxpayers to spend hundreds of millions of dollars, out of work taxpayers for what? We've already got a sports facility. We aren't going to create that many more concession jobs at a new sports facility. It is an absurd proposal coming from an absurd source to do that.
And can I add this?
The other thing I got to say I really am worried about, and the sports department at the newspaper, is already jumping on lobbying, and
well, of course.
But a new arena for the Bucks would not be built downtown. We don't know what that hundreds of millions of dollar gift from the Pettits would be turned into. I don't know. Maybe they just make it a parking lot. But it would be built out where Miller Park is, where all the business, the downtown gift from the Bucks. It's just an absurd idea.
I don't think there's public support either. The Packers had a heck of a time selling in that community a sales tax increase to expand on Lambeau Field. The Bucks don't have the same love.
The Packers expanded an existing facility, and I still don't see why they can't expand the existing facility.
Next topic. The Voter ID bill will be signed into tax law by Governor Walker next week, or into law by Governor Walker next week. If you want to vote, you'll have to show a picture ID. It's that simple. Some Democratic state senators were so upset they refused to even vote on it. It bothers me that they don't take part in the political process, but I understand they're making a statement, correct?
Well, that's exactly what it is. I think they knew that a Republican majority would certainly have it as a high priority. That has been the case. The bill has moved forward. And it's moved forward, frankly, rather quickly.
Really?
Given
quickly.
7
years, 8 years.
It's moved forward quickly in the new legislative administration. One of the things, and this is where I guess I have always had a lot of consternation, is if you have people who exercise their right to vote, and they will, those who take it seriously will go and exercise their right to vote, and they should be able to demonstrate who they are when they go into the polls. That, to me, is just as important as people exercising that right to vote, because you can offset an illegal vote with a legal vote, and that to me is problematic. This may not go as far as some want it to go. There's some that want to eliminate same-day registration. I think you can keep same-day registration in as long as you have proper identification for those who go to the polls. This is the right way to go.
State Senator Lena Taylor, who sits here with us once in a great while, she keeps referring to this as the disenfranchised vote.
Of course it is.
Because it is. It will disenfranchise people of their right to vote in an effort to solve a problem that doesn't exist. We're talking about using this whole idea, which is it's a red herring of we have voter fraud in Wisconsin, so we need to have picture ID. We don't have voter fraud in Wisconsin. And the other, story that we'll hear sometimes is, well, we have to do it because Wisconsin is one of a handful of states that doesn't require a voter ID. That's not true either. There are only 8 other states that require voters to have an ID, a picture ID, when they vote. So this is something that really will disenfranchise people. There are other provisions in that piece of legislation that are going to be particularly harmful for poor minority folks, primarily, who move often. In the past, you had to be in your residence for at least 10 days in order to be able to vote in the precinct in which you now live. This legislation moves that out to 28 days. So it makes it even harder for people who are poor and mobile to be able to exercise their right to vote. It's a bad law, and it's being made to fulfill some kind of political fantasy because there is no issue with voter fraud in this state.
And Joel, when people say, yeah, it's not that big of a deal, though, you have to show an ID to cash a check or to buy a Sudafed or to buy a six-pack, why is it a big deal to have to pull out your wallet to exercise one of the greatest rights in the universe?
But because it is a right. Because it is a right. You don't have a right to rent a video or buy Sudafed. That's not in your Constitution, but you do have a constitutional right to vote. The problem with voting has always been not enough people do it. It's not that there are people voting more times than they should, or that there's people out there, trying to steal elections by voting a bunch of times. No, a good election, and actually Wisconsin, because they've encouraged voting in the past, has high turnout. High turnout in any election is 60%. That means 40% of the people who are eligible to vote don't vote. In many elections, it's down to 30% or 40%. And the problem is trying to get people to exercise their right. Obviously, I don't even answer those Republican arguments anymore because they're phony arguments. They were made up. They were made up to justify what they know they're doing, which is preventing people from voting. And I just keep telling myself that really all this proves is that their ideas are so bad. The only way they can get them passed is to drive people away from the polls, and so that you can't vote, because they would be voted out of office otherwise.
And Kevin, to those who say they should make voting as easy as possible for everybody,
we should do whatever we can to make our election process clean and honest. And voters in Wisconsin
clean and honest.
Have lost confidence in this election.
Only in Waukesha County.
Well, the Milwaukee Police Department came up with 67 pages of voter fraud. So to say that there's no voter fraud is crazy.
But they came up with...
I'll make 2 quick points in the short amount of time we have left here, because we've talked about this ad nauseum. Indiana, which has supposedly the most restrictive photo ID law in the nation, when that case went all the way up to the United States Supreme Court, lawyers who argued against that requirement could not produce one individual in the entire state of Indiana who had been disenfranchised. And number 2, state of Georgia also has a very restrictive photo ID law. Disenfranchisement, they have seen their turnout go up substantially. So it doesn't disqualify any voters, and all of this hyperbole about what it's going to do and how it's going to wreck the election system is just nonsense.
All right, next topic. Arnold Schwarzenegger joined a long, long list of big-name politicians this week, guys whose sexual indiscretions and marital infidelities reveal them to be not exactly what they were pretending to be. You remember all the names: John Norquist, Bill Clinton, John Edwards, Elliot Spitzer, Jesse Jackson, Mark Sanford. The list goes on and on and on and on and on. I always find it fascinating that they do this when there is so much at stake, so many family members to get hurt, and they have so much to lose. What is it? Is it a power thing? What is it?
I don't know.
Well, there's no law against being stupid.
Well, that's exactly it. I think once you reach that level of scrutiny, if you can get away with something, you take the risk and try to get away with it. But they live in an entirely different world. They live in a different world economically. They live in a different world in terms of public interest. They live in a different world in terms of how they conduct their own personal lives within their families.
Don't forget media scrutiny.
And
this
the media
isn't the days
scrutiny
of the early 60s and the Kennedys anymore, when it was all kept hush-hush.
That's right. You can't do that anymore. That's what's so amazing about the fact that he was able to keep this under wraps for as long as he was able to keep it under wraps. And now it's in another arena. It's in the arena of public scrutiny because it's salacious. Now you're talking tens of millions of dollars in personal financial settlements that will be made on to the child that's involved, to the family that was jilted in all of this. I don't know. It doesn't surprise me that it happened. It surprised me that in this day of media scrutiny, it was maintained. They were able to maintain it as a secret.
Denise, you think it's a power thing? You think it's a thing unique to politicians? Or is it a very simple sexual thing?
You know, power is not the word that popped into my head immediately.
Can you say it on public television?
No, I can't. But I think it is the sense, though, that somehow people live by a different set of rules because of the way they're treated by the rest of society. So, you know, you think it's okay to do something that's going to be harmful to your family, harmful perhaps to your career, but more importantly, harmful to your family because you want to do it. And you don't play by the same rules as everybody else, so you don't have to worry about that. We've kind of created this society where this is acceptable. And I think particularly it's something that we find acceptable for men, where there's no public shunning that takes place because you've broken your vows to your wife and your family, you've broken your word. That's okay. Somehow it's something that we say, oh, that's terrible, but tell me more. You know, it's very salacious. We treat this as something that is pure gossip that borders on news, when in fact what it is a personal failing on the parts of all these individuals you mentioned. And, you know, we could have gone on and named more. We could have thrown Newt Gingrich in there as well. We have to realize that at the very base of this, we are talking about people, and people who have made promises to other folks and have broken their words. That's not something that's news, and that's not something that should be celebrated.
It's not news, but it is every single day.
It's tragic. I know. I bet my husband this morning, we were watching the Today Show at 8 o'clock. I said, I'm going to tell you right now what the top of the hour show is going to be. It's going to be Arnold. He said, what about him? I said, it doesn't even have to be anything new. It's just going to be Arnold.
Every time this happens, I think, is it because they're politicians and because they play this game professionally that they always compromise? Because if you don't compromise in politics, you don't get anywhere, you don't accomplish anything. And then do they say, well, if I compromise every day of my life professionally, can I compromise my beliefs personally and get away with it?
But I know.
But it's not just politicians who screw around.
For sure.
Yeah.
And actually, Denise did mention the word that I know the woman I've lived with for 45 years would use immediately. It's a man thing. And I know it's not politicians, and it's not Hollywood celebrities, but those are the ones we read about, right? Yes, we do read them. We used to always read about the Hollywood people, and now we read about the Hollywood people and the Washington people. But we all know men in our personal lives who do the same thing, who have gone through 2 or 3 marriages, and they didn't start on the second one and the third one, after the first one and the second one is over either. The truth of the matter is we all know people we consider highly intelligent, people of integrity even, people that we admire and respect on every other level, and on that personal level it's proving something. It's proving something to themselves about their own manhood is what it is.
Can I make an observation? At least I take some comfort in that with all those people you mentioned leading into this topic, in every single case, the woman who had been betrayed and mistreated stood side by side with the bum, with doe eyes, looking on with almost admiration and almost forgiving for what those people had done.
And that was a requirement in politics.
Yeah.
Sickening, nauseating. Mrs. Tiger Woods may have broken the mold now and may have set a new pattern.
She broke the Glock.
And now you have Maria Shriver, who also said, you know what, I'm not going to take it. That's it. You did me wrong. We're not doing the Tammy Wynette stand by your man jazz here.
All right. Now, I know we're not going to change the world with our next discussion, but I'm curious what you all think about this. Commencement ceremonies for colleges all across the country are being held this month, a lot of them tonight. How in the world are these kids, how is the world that these kids are entering any different than the one that we entered when we graduated? Is it better? Is it worse? Is it sounder? Is it
drastically different for these young people for a number
you
of
optimistic?
reasons. I mean, I am optimistic because I have a son who's going to be graduating from UW in December. So I'm very optimistic. But, you know, I think the reality of it is they're entering the job market at a time of incredible financial uncertainty. You know, there have been all kinds of studies and reports that have shown that these young people are entering the job market making less than they thought they would, which sets them further behind for their entire lives. Most of them, one poll that I saw found that 85% of them thought that they would have a lower standard of living than their parents. So they're entering this job market at a time of incredible uncertainty. There's a lot of political uncertainty as well. And quite frankly, a lot of them are entering their new world of work with a ton of debt, a ton of debt to pay for school. So I think it doesn't bode well for them. Quite frankly, I think for those kids who do have debt, it doesn't bode well for our economy. If you think about it, if kids are leaving college, and it's not uncommon for some kids to leave with at least $25,000 in debt, they're going to have to take care of that debt before they do all the other things that we normally did when we got out of college.
I read the other day that some kids who graduate from college now will still be paying their college debts off when their kids are in college.
Absolutely.
Wow.
You look at the amount of debt that kids will have to pay, and the implications for our society is that they may not be able to go into fields like teaching because the compensation doesn't match the level of debt that they'll have to pay off and still maintain some kind
So
of
is a degree still worth it?
expected lifestyle. Well, the degree, an advanced degree, is necessary. There's just no two ways around it. If you're going to have any kind of economic reasonable life, you're going to have at least a 2-year degree, most often a 4-year degree
That's true.
after high school.
I wouldn't disagree with that, but I think the study that you referred to, Denise, just a couple of days ago out of Rutgers University showed that maybe half of the jobs that are out there available to these graduates don't require a college degree at all. So they've just spent 4 years of going to school, accruing a $200,000 debt.
Yeah.
The job that they're going to get, they thought that they were going to have higher skills for. They have no confidence that they're going to be as good as their father or their mother. So it's a real tough situation for them.
30 seconds. Do you tell a 17-year-old kid in high school right now, be optimistic, go to college, everything's going to be fine?
you have to.
You say go to college because if you don't, your unemployment is twice as high and your
wages are
lifetime
lower.
income is half. But don't go to some phony college, and we see them springing up on street corners everywhere. Go to a real university.
Dan, the thing people like us with kids in college have to worry about is that they don't get jobs and they end up moving back home. That's the worst thing about all this.
I don't have to worry about that for about 25 more years.
Back to Madison for just a minute. There are times when legislation is crafted very carefully to deal with a very specific issue. Other times it's a matter like using a sledgehammer to go after the fly. Rick Horowitz isn't hunting insects right now. Well, not exactly, but well, let him tell it. Rick.
I've got a broken shoelace. Now, here are some ways I can deal with that. With a new shoelace, with a soup bowl, with a can of Lysol, with a dawn to dusk curfew on anyone under the age of 25. So let's talk about all these new voter ID laws springing up everywhere, okay? Let's talk about the problem of voter fraud, that's our broken shoelace, and the much bigger problem of voter suppression, that's our dawn to dusk curfew. It would be nice, you see, if the solution matched the problem, assuming, of course, the problem you're trying to solve is the problem you say you're trying to solve. You notice how they've switched tactics lately? The make it hard to vote brigades? They don't focus anymore on how much voter fraud there's been. That's because there hasn't been much voter fraud. Study after study has shown that. Of course, those are just facts. So now, new argument, they talk about how people need to have confidence in the voting process, that people shouldn't have to worry about fraudulent voting. Pretty clever, right? Because then you don't have to show that anybody, let alone lots of anybody's, has actually voted illegally. You only have to claim that some people somewhere are worried about it. And why would they be worried about it when it hardly ever happens? Could it be because the Republican Party and their media wing have been shouting about it for years? So you're saying, this is their other line, that you're okay with a little bit of voter fraud? No. Are you okay with a little bit of jaywalking? People can get killed jaywalking. So why aren't you passing laws that require barriers on every street in the state to keep people from crossing in the middle of the block or crossing against the light? Or better yet, why don't you tell people, or at least certain people, certain types of people, they can't drive and they can't walk, that they need to stay indoors? You don't do that because the solution would be costly and inconvenient and much, much worse than the problem you're trying to solve. Assuming, of course, you're trying to solve a problem and not create one. But that's hardly the case, is it?
Well, thank you, Rick, and thank you so very much for watching. Stay warm, stay dry, enjoy the rest of your weekend.